of car crash data analysis by Connor Jacobs. Car crash data analysis is super important because it provides insights into factors contributing to car accidents and their outcomes. By studying this data, we can identify patterns that lead to deadly combinations. Now, it's impossible to avoid something sometimes, and sometimes we have to do things that are dangerous. But people also sometimes mix up what's more dangerous and what's less dangerous. So today we're going to look into that and hopefully clear any confusion as well as analyze some data because it's super fun. Perfect. So now we have the factors that go into it. We got the crash time, which is crucial for understanding traffic flow, the crash day of the week, which is important to determine if some days are more prone to accidents than others, the crash month, which can uncover seasonal trends. We have the posted speed limit, which of course has a huge impact on crash outcomes. We have the number of fatal injuries, the number of incapacitating injuries, the number of non-incapacitating injuries, and the number of total injuries. So let's get started. We have the first question. When grouping crashes based on posted speed, crash hour, and crash day of the week versus total injuries, what distinct groups emerge and how do they differ? So in order to analyze how distinct groups emerge when grouping crashes based on posted speed limit, crash hour, and crash day of the week versus injuries total, I used a k-means clustering model in order to group the data so I could have a unique look at it. First, the data was cleaned and relevant predictors were selected. These features were standardized, and then I made a plot of the sum of squared error versus the clusters, ranging from 2 to 19 clusters to see which number is most effective. And at the elbow point, which is right here where my mouse is, at 5, that is the number of clusters I will be going with. So I created a k-means model with 5 clusters and used a pipeline to standardize the data and fit the model. This created distinct groups in the cluster. The data can be visualized in scatter plots above, and a quick analysis of these scatter plots are that in the first one, so posted speed limit versus total injuries, it seems to peak at 30 miles per hour. This kind of makes sense because 30 miles per hour is residential areas. There's a lot less lights and a lot more crosswalks that are unprotected or crosswalks with stop signs. As we know, if you're headed eastbound from Walnut, so you're exiting Anderson parking and you take a right, there's a whole bunch of crosswalks, a whole bunch of stop signs, and people have gotten hit in those, so that's why we have crossing guards now. I know when I was a kid and I was biking around, like a little kid, my mom would want me to stay in these smaller residential streets. Now, we don't have super busy residential streets where I'm from, but she still wanted me to stay in the residential streets. And it turns out, just based off speed limit, you're a lot less likely to get hit in those higher speed limit areas because if you need to cross the street, you're going to a light, something protected. It's always a protected left. There's no yield left. These main streets can oftentimes be more safe. So for our next, we have crash hour versus total injuries. As you can see, it's fairly even throughout the day, and then we get to like 3 o'clock and things peak all of a sudden. And things peak all the way till late at night, or yeah, till 8 o'clock. So we have 3 to 8, and this is when people are driving home from work, potentially tired, potentially hungry and just needing dinner. They just want to get home, and oftentimes accidents peak then. Their brain's on something else, possibly, and they get in an accident. For our last clustering for this question, we have the crash day of the week versus total injuries. As you can see, it's pretty even throughout with some outliers here at 15. That's terrible. That's a lot of injuries for an accident. Um, but throughout the week, we have our commuters and we have our weekend drivers, and it seems to be about the same for everybody. So next we have, how does the time of day affect the total number of injuries, incapacitating, fatal, and non-incapacitating? So I applied the dbScan clustering algorithm because it allows for the identification of dense clusters. The data was cleaned and relevant features, crash hour, injuries incapacitating, injuries fatal, and injuries non-incapacitating were selected. Features were standardized in order to ensure uniformity. I selected a neighborhood size of 0.33 and a minimum number of samples required is 5. The results were visualized with the scatter plot. I'd like to say the reason why I made it 0.33 as epsilon, or the minimum distance, is because the points are fairly close together here. There's a lot of data samples. For these clustering algorithms, we actually had to take a fraction of the data because of the limitations from Google Colab, so we took 4%. Otherwise, we would run out of RAM. So there's a lot of data points. So we made the neighborhood size small, and then same with the minimum number of samples. Minimum number of samples, I found I could change more without Google Colab running out of available RAM. So I set it at 5. Um, yeah. So here is our first graph. This is the scatter plot of the dbScan clusters of injuries incapacitating versus crash hour. In this scatter plot, we can see that there's a cluster from 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. right here. This purple cluster I'm circling here with my mouse. This is a very dense cluster. That's why it's purple, or that's why it's cluster number 8, and it's not the same cluster as the ones around it. And this is all the way from your evening commuters all the way into the midnight drivers. So there's potentially a lot of reasons why there's a dense number of incapacitating injuries and accidents really at that time. Possible reasons maybe include, like I said earlier, hungry, tired as we get later into the night because it keeps going. People possibly under the influence, all sorts of reasons. So yeah, driving late at night, as we know, is more dangerous. Insurance rates are the insurance things that let the insurance company know when you're driving to, in theory, lower your rate will spike your insurance if you drive late at night. I know the Tesla insurance does that. So yeah, don't get that insurance, I think, but that's me. We have the fatal injuries versus the crash data. So this looks a little bit funny because there aren't exactly a ton of people dying all the time in these accidents, and half a person or 1.5 people can't die. So it looks a little funny, and I don't think dbScan was the best for this because people don't super often die in these. This clustering shows that throughout the day, though, that there are many different densities possibly, or that the amount of people dying are just spread out. So I don't think dbScan was the best for fatal injuries versus crash hour. And for our last graph, we have the non-incapacitating injuries versus the crash hour. As we can see, there is a way larger portion of people, once again, in that evening commuting zone. Evening commuting seems to be the most dangerous time. People really want to be home as they're coming home from school or work. So, more accidents happen, it seems like. And the data is here to show it. We can see all this was identified as noise, but it was not noise. This is really should be a part of maybe cluster number 9. And once again, just driving late at night, it's dangerous, and you can see it in the clusters. So, and in the scatter plot especially. So, yep, be safe out there, people. That's all.